Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's installment of the CloudBees OSS team demonstration for the new changes in Jenkins. We're a week late this month, but we plan to pick this up again on the first Thursday of April again. Today, we'll be going through a couple of new changes from Jesse Glick on pipeline and Stephen Connolly on the multi-branch folders. And we were going to show some of the new features in pipeline in declarative, but there are some issues there. So I'll have Andrew talk about that when we get to that, but we won't have a demonstration today. So I apologize for that. In the future, if there are other things you want to see, let us know and we can try to pick that up as well. And again, please go to IRC and ask questions on in the Jenkins room. With that, go ahead and take it away, Jesse.
Sure, thank you, Patrick. So I'd like to talk about an enhancement that was made recently to the library feature in pipeline. So if you look at our plugins page and what we have installed, let's scroll down a little bit here. You can see that shared Groovy libraries we've have at this 2.7 release, in which we've added a new library step. So I'm going to show what that looks like, and we'll just start by looking at a Jenkins file that's using the original external library system. So if we just take a look at the console output for this, I'll also show the script that is running. So this is a Jenkins file that's loading a library called tools. And in this case, this is a library that we have defined in the Jenkins configuration, in this case for a folder. So we have this configuration section for pipeline libraries. Here I just have it on a multi-branch folder, but it could be at any kind of higher level folder. And we have a definition of what the name of the library is and what version it should be, and some information on where to check this library out from. Our system also has a global library that's defined. So this is, let me scroll this a little bit. So this is another library that we've called test result, and I've checked load implicitly here. That means that this library is going to be available to every script on the system without the Jenkins file even asking for it. And this is coming from a different Git repository there. So let's take a look at the console output for this build. Again, this is using the original external library syntax. So it's got its Jenkins file and it's trying to parse it. And the first thing it does is that it's loading this tools library. And so this whole block, at some point I would like to maybe colorize some of this and put it into a folding block or something like that. But this whole block is where it's checking out the repository for this tools library that we've defined. And then it continues and it loads this global library. And then it goes and starts running the build. So if you look at the Jenkins file definition, we've just declared here that we want to use this library with an annotation. We're also importing a Groovy class from that library's sources directory. So you can see that we have a class with a type and some defined methods and constructor and everything like that. We also have a global variable in this library called MVN for Maven. And this is basically defining something that can be run like a function. So if you see the MVN being called like a step, that's actually running this global library here. Okay, so far so good, and this all runs. So next what we're going to show is the new changes in the 2.7 release. And I have these set up as separate branches of the pipeline. I've configured them to not be built by default, so I can launch them when I want to. If you're curious how that happens, that's just some configuration in the multi-branch setup. We're saying that if it's not the branch named master, then I want to suppress the automatic triggering. So it's not going to do that first build automatically. So let's start the first build of this library step. And we're going to scroll. We're going to scroll down to replay so we can take a look at the script that it's running, and we'll take a look at the console output also. So in the console output, so it starts off looking pretty similar, but then you'll see that that it's only checking out the global library. So this is always going to be checked out for every build on the system, because we declared it as implicit. But then it's going and it's loading the tools as a library step. So you can actually see this running if you go into pipeline steps to see a detailed view of what it's running. It's starting the build, and then somewhere in the build, it's loading a shared library on the fly. So everything that happens to check out that library is part of a single pipeline step that you could actually put somewhere in the middle of the build. It doesn't need to be at the start. So this is how that looks. So we're running this new step library, and we need to specify the name of the library we want to load. So again, this corresponds to the name that we've predefined for the library here. So it's going to look up this library definition and load it. And then we're using this library in two ways. So first of all, just because we ran the library step, that's enough to load all of the global variables into the system. So MVN is going to work. So even if we just did it like this, that would be enough to make the MVN global variable accessible to us. But we also want to be able to use this class library here, this servers class. In order to do that, we're going to have to use a little bit of special syntax, and I'll explain in a little bit why we need a special syntax here. But basically, the return value of the library step is a handle you can use to load any classes that the library defines. And you just access classes by using a notation where you give the fully qualified name using the Java-like package demo, and then the name of the class is servers. And you can call static methods, get static fields, and if you want to run a constructor, oops, for some reason it's not, here we go. So if you want to run a constructor here, then you need to use a pseudo method called new. So you sort of call the constructor as if it were a static method in the class that was called new, and you pass the constructor arguments here. At that point, you have an object here, servers, which is an instance of the servers class. And so at that point, you can do everything else the same way you did before. So we can call methods on it. Servers.deploy production is going to call this deploy method here. So if we go back to the console, this should have, after this library step here is complete, that's this, then everything else should look exactly the same. So it's going to go and use the server and try to deploy to production and do all of these things. Let's say it can go ahead and deploy if it wants to. So that's one usage of the library step, and the interesting thing here is that you could make this expression dynamic. So unlike the library annotation, which has to take a compile time constant string, when you run the library step, this is just part of your script like any other step you run. So if you wanted to, you could say tools add, and if you want to specify a version, you could try to pick up the same Git branch name as the Jenkins file is coming from. For example, if you want to align your library branches with branch names in the application repository, or you could, for example, you could parameterize the library version by defining some parameters for the job and loading them like that. So you have a lot more options in terms of exactly how you load the library. So let's go back to our job, but now we're going to look at a different mode of the library step, which again we'll do as a separate branch. So again, it's going to look basically the same as the other library step build did. So it's going to run a library step and load that library in the middle of the build. This time I'm giving it a different name. I'm calling it tools2 because I want to have a different name than the one defined on the folder. So the idea here, let's go to replay so you can see the script. The idea here is that I'm not relying on any configuration in Jenkins at all for this library. So even if I just deleted this section, so even if I went and deleted that whole library definition from the Jenkins configuration, this would still work. And what it's doing here is it's saying, yes, I want to load a library. I'm going to give it a name in case that name gets used later. For example, you can use the name from a library resource step that lets you load resources. This time I have to specify the version or branch name that I want in my script. And I'm passing this retriever argument. So retriever tells us how we're going to load the library. And you can use any method of loading a library that you could for the library definition and the GUI configuration. So if you want to see the options that are available, you go to pipeline syntax for the job and you go to the library step. And it doesn't matter what we type for the name, but if we don't have a special retrieval, then it just gives you the simple syntax that loads a predefined library definition. But if you want to select something like that, localhost lib, and you say generate pipeline script, then it will give you a pretty verbose step definition. This will work, but it has a bunch of options that are basically junk. So at some point, we'll do some cleanup in the Git plugin to try to have it drop all of these extraneous arguments that are basically the defaults and give you a nice simple syntax straight out of this pipeline syntax page. So here I've trimmed it down to the actually essential parts, which is just specifying the name of the remote. Other than that, it's exactly the same. So I'm still able to access classes from the library and access my global variables from it as well. So this gives you some flexibility because you can have a Jenkins file that not only dynamically figures out a version for a library, but actually takes on the whole responsibility of figuring out which libraries it wants to load and where they're coming from. So if you don't want these things configured on the Jenkins side and you want it all self-contained in the Jenkins file, you can do it this way. So to go back to, let's see, this is, do I want to proceed with deployment? Sure, go ahead. So to go back to what I was talking about earlier with the special syntax for accessing classes, let's see what happens if we replay this. So just a reminder for people who haven't used this feature before, when you're replaying things, you can test out changes to to a library definition or to your Jenkins file without having to commit those changes to SCM. So I can see what would happen on a sample build if I made some changes to the library definition or to my Jenkins file. And then if I'm happy with the result, I can commit them to SCM and make them official. But let's see what would happen if we tried. So originally, the original master branch had this as a reminder. It had import demo servers, and then servers equal new servers this. So what if we tried to use the library step without the annotation here, and we just said library tools, and we tried to use the servers class that way, just importing it directly from Groovy. So if we try to run this, you will see that it's going to blow up because Groovy compiler doesn't know where the servers class is or what you're talking about actually. And the reason is that the Groovy compiler is running before the program has started. So it has loaded the global library that was implicit, but it hasn't loaded our special library yet because we haven't run the program yet that tells it to do that. And so when it's trying to compile the program and it sees this import statement, it has no idea what you're talking about, and it just dies. So we can't do that. That's why we're not able to use import statements with the library step, and we have to use the special syntax to get access to things. Is because we can't rely on the Groovy compiler to figure out what these classes are. So you can use everything. As I said, you can run constructors, and you can use all of the features of the class library this way. The downside is that you have no static type checking here anymore, and this is all relying on dynamic type checking. So if you make some sort of mistake and try to pass the wrong arguments here, or say we forgot to pass the script argument to this constructor, and we try to run it, instead of getting compilation error from the Groovy compiler, it's going to start to try running, but then it's going to get confused at runtime and not know what you're trying to call here. So that's the downside. So if you can use the library annotation, then you should do that because you get better type checking. But if you need the extra flexibility, then you can switch to the library step. All right, I think that's everything I had to demonstrate for this. Any questions about this?
I didn't see anything in the IRC, but if people please ask.
Yep. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, just pipe up in IRC. All right, I guess you can pass it over to Stephen if he's ready to present.
Oh, I'm ready. I think I've ironed the bugs out, but who knows? Am I presenting yet?
Yes, you're presenting to everyone now, Stephen.
Okay, all right. So for a large chunk of the last month, we've been doing a bit of an effort to try and tidy up some of the stuff in the SCM API related plugins. So we've had some success. We solved over 70 issues, and obviously there were more issues created in the interim, but we've managed to actually get some clear breathing space between where we were and where we are now, in terms of, like, this is issues created, and so I was going to start at 0, but you can see we've actually managed to solve more than we created. There were a couple of ones that I thought would be nice to show in terms of actual issues fixed. So one of the biggest ones is the GitHub API rate limit. So the easiest way to show this one is I'm just going to create a non. Nullis Cloud, a GitHub organization folder, and I'm going to pick the repository CloudBees. Now, I'm not using any scan credentials. Now, typically, with GitHub, if you're not using scan credentials, you're only going to get 60 API calls an hour. And so we're going to use up more than 60 pretty much almost immediately. And what you'd have previously is it would then blow up and you'd get no failure. Now, what instead is going to happen is we start the API usage, and now we can already see it's starting to tell us about the API budget. And so what it said is, okay, I had 59, I'm 6 under budget. So it's decided for the hour, there's a certain amount, depending on where it is in the hour, there's a certain amount it can have used. That's the budget. As long as it's over budget, it will make API calls. As soon as it goes under budget, it will sleep until it's due to come over budget again. And so at this point, it's now sleeping. And so it's going to sit there and wait 5 minutes. And then in 5 minutes time, it'll wake up, check its API limit again, and continue going on. So this will actually complete. For this particular repository, it's going to take 3 to 4 hours for it to get through because it just has so many repositories. But rather than having it failing all the time, at least now you're always getting it to actually complete all the way and succeed, which is a quite significant improvement. A larger organization. So, oh no, I'm on the wrong one. This one. So if we take this one, which is using actual credentials. So for this one, I'm going to hit scan now. And let's look at the log. And you can see that's fine. We're not being told about the rate limit because we're so far above the rate limit at the moment. A user credential has 5,000 requests. We're so far above the rate limit that it's not going to be an issue for us. But as we get nearer the rate limit, which just may require me triggering this a couple of times, it will then start reporting the rate limit for us. And so we're okay on that scan. And let's scan again. I'm just wanting to show you that it starts reporting the rate limit once it gets far enough. So while it's doing that, I thought I might show one or two other things. So there is now better UI feedback. So what do we mean by that? So when I'm in here and I go into configure, no, it's not this one. Let's go and create a multi-branch pipeline. And let's say it's, so if I create a multi-branch pipeline and I add a GitHub source, so this is GitHub, I can now say that I'm going to pick a big one and I'm going to go GitHub. So at this point, now previously you'd be sitting here not knowing why this input box took forever and a day to fill in. So what's happened now is that while with the change that we've made, we actually put a little spinner in here while it's filling in. So if I change this to Jenkins CI, you can now see that it spins while it's going and populating that list. Previously, you had no indication that it was actually loading information and stuff was continuing to go on. So that's quite a useful little visual indicator to at least let you know, hey, it's trying to get the information, and once it's actually got all that information at this point now, it's got it, and so now you've got the full list of repositories that you can pick from. So that's one of those. If I go back here, we'll leave that one. This guy, let's scan organization now. Geez, we haven't eaten up 5,000 yet. The next one is simplifying the menus. So previously, you may remember we had the scan now button, scan organization now, being an actual menu that then had the scan now and then the log and the events. We decided that it's kind of just something that people prefer to be able to actually access straight away, and it makes more sense for people to have them at the same level. So now we've just moved these up so that, like on a traditional build, you get scanned now. We have the organization log and we have the organization events there. The much more visible situation for us now. And so, no, still not hit the rate limit. Another one is tidying up triggers. So probably easiest to show this on this one. So if I go into configure, we've actually tidied up. There used to be some triggers for build now and for the build URL. They were ones which were triggers coming from Jenkins core. We've added in some logics as we filter out the triggers that don't make sense. And so now you just have your periodically, if not otherwise, run, which is typically, once you've got event support, you typically want periodically, if not otherwise, run, and you probably want to pick something like 8 hours or 1 day. Basically, the amount of time you want a missing event, if you happen to get a failed delivery of an event, that to be not noticed. So like I would expect most people would be somewhere between 4 hours and 1 day to 1 week. And those would be kind of the recommended things. It's also how often you clean up dead branches. So that's there. So that was tidying up triggers. Tabs show the count. So you may have noticed this when Jesse was doing his demo. If I go in here, we now have 12 for the number of repositories. When I go into this folder here, I now have 8 for the number of branches and 1 for the number of pull requests. Whereas if I go into another one, like advanced, pull requests 0, branches 1. It's just it can be hard to know whether there's anything in the pull requests or how many branches you have and this sort of stuff. So along with the reporting of the primary branch coming in blue, or sorry, in bold, it adds a little bit of nice improvement there. And then Bitbucket events. Well, we can show Bitbucket events. So previously, when Bitbucket had an event, what would happen is it would basically trigger a full scan of the Bitbucket repository. And so what we've done now is we've added the exact same kind of eventing support, the specific eventing support that we had. Let me just tell this one to scan it. We've added the same event support that you'd have in GitHub into the Bitbucket plugin. So I'm going to sit here on the multi-branch pipeline events, and let's get me something. So here we are in a Bitbucket repository. Here, the Jenkins file. Hello, world. Get commit tweak message. File get push. So we've now pushed the event to Bitbucket, and there you can see the event has been received. We just literally scan just that one repository, and that triggers this build straight away. So that's the event support is now available in Bitbucket. It's also available in Bitbucket Server. You need to use there's a specific plugin for Bitbucket Server that does provides the event support, but it's the exact same event support. If you don't have the latest version of that Bitbucket Server plugin, then it'll end up triggering a full scan because it doesn't have the information required for that event. So you get the goodness of that in terms of when you ask where that branch event comes, you actually get the origin showing that it's coming from the Bitbucket server and the endpoint it's been sent to. So that information is there as well. So let's see, have we used up API limits yet? Oh, I'm on the wrong one. Problem with calling them both CloudBees. You know, it's just gotten too good at keeping the rate limit. But the other one I should point out is that this one here, this rate limit, is still going. It's still keeping its budget. It's still sleeping. In between, we'd already triggered this scan here of this organization. And because of this repository, and because that's also competing for the rate limit, in between, it wasn't able to do anything else because it ended up being over budget when it woke up. But those are concurrently processing, and that's all working fine. So was there anything else? I think that's most of the tidy up. There are some other ones coming down the road. So if I go, yes, right. So let's just sit here on organization events, and we go this one, right? Git. Move this one out of the way. That's right. We have a Jenkins file in a repository that doesn't have a Jenkins file. So you can see here when I created the repository, I got the event showing the repository being created. It looked it up. It said there was no Jenkins file, so it said nothing for me to do. So if I git add Jenkins file, git it, adding Jenkins file. Now there's caches within GitHub that take typically around 4 to 5 seconds to synchronize fully. So we delay events on arrival by 5 seconds before they get processed. There is a property that you can define in Jenkins that specifies how long that delay is. So if you're hitting issues where the events are coming through and then they find things that don't exist yet, that's typically the result of the event being missing. Now, the reason this guy is sitting here is probably because we have concurrent events. So, and the concurrent events are picking up. Oh, there it is. I went away, and while I went away, no. Let me have a look. So this one here, let's redeliver. That should have been picked up. Okay. This is no problem. So if we go into logs, you'll see that there are two specific files here. There's multi-branch log and there's organization folder log. So let's have a look at this guy. Oh. So we got a push hook updated event with timestamp 1530. So let's go and redeliver. That one's not coming in. this is the push event with timestamp just now, but it's not matched anything because there's no repository. So what I'm trying to show here is that if you want to look as to why things are not being matched, in the logs directory in your Jenkins home, there's 2 specific log files that allow you to figure out why it's not being picked up. I suspect that this is just a particular piece of the event just hasn't been picked up because it's partially matched on a created repository. It should be being picked up, but for some reason it's not. And I just need to dig into why that is. But the point I'm trying to get at is if you're looking and trying to figure out why events aren't picking up. So let's just force this issue. There we go. So I did find that branch. And there's that guy here, and that's the master branch. And let's just double check. The repository events. There we go. So we've got that repository event coming in, I think. Yeah. Receive push event to repository master, updated event, and it got the update there. So that's that. So we can see here, and then we go under here. There's the push event. I'm not sure why the other event creating the repository wasn't coming true. I think I just need to dig into that. There may be some other little minor tweak there. But nonetheless, this gives you detail. And then this is showing one of the other changes that we have coming down the line, whereby the actual events can be more descriptive. So in this case here, this event is saying it's a push to the master branch. Now, when that same event is triggering something at this level, on this level, that event then becomes a push to this repository at a particular branch. And then when you're actually looking at, so if we go and I connect back into my system, and I logs, cat, Jenkins. So you'll see here, this guy is the global event, and he's saying received push event to branch master in repository CloudBees demo. So in this particular case, it's giving you the detail to say this is the CloudBees repository for this one. When you are looking at it in terms of the organization events, it will see push event to master in repository there, created with timestamp that. Oh, that's what it is. Okay, right. It did arrive, but it just took forever to get. I probably wasn't reloading the page. That's all. So it had actually got the event. So you can see here, this is push event in repository demo. So at this point, because this is the CloudBees organization, it doesn't need to tell you the redundant information. And then when we actually go into that specific repository and we're looking at the repository events, at this stage, okay, here it's telling you that it's repository CloudBees thing, but when you actually go into the actual build and you look at this guy, it's just telling you it's a push event to branch master, and that's what triggered it. And so I think those are kind of the ones I wanted to show off. So at this stage, Patrick, if anything else to go through.
Yeah, Andrew's got a quick Jenkins file to walk through for some declarative changes, so we can switch over to him. I'm going to share your screen now, Andrew.
Quick, Andrew, take the dodgy pictures off.
Yeah.
I'm always ready. Ish.
Thanks.
All right.
Andrew, you're live.
So is this visible enough? Hello?
Hello.
I was muted. Yeah, it's good. Good
Okay.
size.
All right. So this is just a quick walkthrough through new features in the declarative syntax added in 1.1 and some warnings about 1.1. So the first thing of note is that we added a new agent type, node. It's basically the same as label, but it allows additional parameters, not just label, such as custom workspace, which is equivalent to the WS step in scripted pipeline or custom workspace in freestyle. It'll set the workspace on that agent to a specific path. If it's not an absolute path, it'll be relative to the agent's workspace root. Next up, thanks to the library step that Jesse was talking about, we are able to actually have libraries be part of the declarative model. And so we'll eventually have support for that in the editor. So you can just specify your libraries in the library section in a lib call, as many as you want, and they'll automatically get loaded. So first regression to mention is that string escaping for Windows paths and environments when using single quotes seems to be weird. We're investigating that, but let's touch on what we actually added in environment. Environment variables can now reference other environment variables. So if we set foo to one thing, then we can refer to foo in another environment variable, and it will resolve correctly. And we can also reference the workspace path that gets processed at the right point, so that does show up there. Next regression, like I said, there are some regressions here. In 1.1 and later, or 1.1 and 1.1.1, you can't nest multiple conditions directly within when anymore. We will have that fixed in the next release. So for now, you would need to do when, all of, and then your nested conditions. This is because we've added logical conditions for when. First, there's any of. Takes one or more nested conditions, and it'll return true if any of the nested conditions return true. While all of will pretty much require all of them to be true, but again, takes one or more nested conditions. Not takes just one nested condition and resolves true if the nested condition is false. So yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory, but this should allow for better combinations and permutations of when conditions that you may run into. And lastly, we've added a new step that's available in both declarative and scripted, that the validate declarative pipeline step that will read in a file from your workspace and validate it as a declarative pipeline. It'll return true if it passes, false if not, and will print out any errors that it encounters along the way. So you can use this if you want to be doing your validation in outside tooling or something like that. But yeah, oh yeah, I forgot it. Yeah, another regression. Right now, methods defined elsewhere in the Jenkins file currently can't be used in when expressions. That's not a path that we have had good testing around or clear vision on what exactly we want to work there. We're working on it to see what we can do about cleaning that up. So if you're using some more complicated cases like that, you may want to be a little careful about upgrading to 1.1. But we're continuing to churn forward. We're going to get these regressions addressed as soon as we can. And yeah, that's it. Next.
Actually, Patrick, there's one last thing I meant to show, but I didn't get I forgot to.
Okay, Stephen, we got 10 minutes before the hour, so we can switch over to you. Thanks, Andrew. Stephen, I'm showing your screen now. You're muted, Stephen.
This is just a quick one. It's a very little small detail. So what's happened now is we are now showing in the last success, last failure, and last duration columns, we're showing for the computed folders, the last success, the last failure, and the last duration of that computed folder. So rather than the build number. So if I were to create a freestyle job, which is free, go here. Let's say this guy, and if we build them now. So you can see here, free last build was build number 1. Or in fact, build number 2. CloudBees last build was 11 minutes ago. Let's kick it off again. At this point, due to the way it only stores 1 build, this is going to flick to NA when it's not building. But when it does complete, you're going to see that link that's going to say I might as well show one other thing while I'm at it. GitHub. So I'm going to go with let's take that one. So I'm going to right. Let's save this one. So this is a repository that I'm scanning at present. And previously, if you wanted to delete a repository and it was scanning, you were kind of stuck. So now we'll actually interrupt any scanning operations and it will get deleted. And then here you can now see the last success column for the CloudBees there with the log link, which will actually bring us to the actual result. And we can see the log and there's the whole scan. So that's just that little 2 small things that I forgot to mention that I think are kind of important. Being able to delete the repository because it will go and delete anything that's in progress within that repository. It will actually stop it, which previously it didn't. And so if you had a large repository with a lot of jobs, it could be quite problematic to actually delete that organization folder. So I'm done, Patrick, that's all.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jesse. I'll get this, make sure this is posted on YouTube and then share the link out for anybody that wants to go back and review this later. So thanks again for everybody joining, and we'll see you again in April.